he whiffed.
Yeah, he whiffed.
He whiffed, man. He missed the ball.
That'll do it, ladies and gentlemen. The long drought is over.
Sacked by Colin Oliver, and the Pokes are going to win Bedlam.
You are listening to The Review on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Review. It's the Online Sports Guys college football podcast featuring us, the Online Sports Guys. Again, this week, your feature performers are me, OSG Phil, and he, OSG Nelson. Brother Wilkie will be joining us a little bit later in the first block with Wilkie's World and his observations on the week that was in the world of college football. Brother J-Dub, he is the victim of, shall we say, some technical difficulties this week.
Technical difficulties.
And he will, if you will.
will.
He will not be joining us this week, but hopefully we'll have him back next week when we have Conference Championship Saturday to talk about and a whole bunch of other stuff moving forward. John, we got a busy week of college football to review here really quick, so we might as well jump in. First of all,
hit it
with breaking news. Yep, that's right. We have breaking news to start the show, and it involves the college coaching carousel. And before we get to the biggest surprise, the Sunday afternoon announcement, we'll come with the early Sunday announcement, and that's that the new head coach of the Florida Gators will be none other than Billy Napier, now ex of the Louisiana Raging Cajuns, one that my better half is sad to lose, but
steamed.
Shall we say, a bit angry to lose to the Florida Gators. However, if you look at the big picture here, John, this is a pretty good hire for the Gators.
No question. And I know that we were all looking at Billy Napier going in a couple of different directions, but the notion that he would end up going from Lafayette to Baton Rouge, that was not going to happen because you would always have a significant portion of the fan base for LSU. And we were having this discussion on the soccer side of things, as we're discussing things today, as we're taping on Sunday with conference semifinal action going on in Major League Soccer. The idea that from Jarrett Smith, LSU fan, and Jason Longshore, Georgia fan, going at it in the Southeastern Conference, you would always have that portion of the LSU fan base that would sit there and say, Lafayette, the University of Louisiana. Yeah, I feel like I should do it in Judge Smales.
I've sentenced boys younger than you to the gas chamber.
Be like, Louisiana, why would we deign ourselves to have some coach from Louisiana being our head coach now? No, that was not going to happen because that was not going to win the press conference at all, and it wasn't going to win the fan base, and it made sense.
Plus, I'm pretty sure he knows where some of the dirty laundry is and probably wanted to run away from that hornet's nest being about an hour west of Baton Rouge.
Yeah. So, it makes sense for Billy Napier to chase something out of state, and the fact that Florida got him, you have a lot of resources available to you. They're not shy about giving them to a coach to make sure he can succeed. We all know what Billy Napier can do when it comes to recruiting because of what he was able to do at Louisiana and turning them into a Fun Belt champ. And there are a lot of pluses here with this hire of Billy Napier. So not a surprise that Billy Napier is leaving Louisiana, sadly, for the boss over there in your studio. But good hire for the University of South Georgia Gainesville campus, and we'll see what happens, giving him resources and what the staff is going to look like for him in the SEC.
Yeah, I really think the Gators actually might have found the right fit for what they're trying to do because Napier's not a guy who's going to be in there and make it all about him. He comes from the Nick Saban. He's spent time as an assistant under both Nick Saban and Dabo Swinney, and has learned what it takes to build a program for the long haul as opposed to building it for a couple of seasons until you move on to the next job. And I think that's important for Florida. Florida's a team that has had some success over the last 10 years periodically, but they've never been able to sustain it. And to have a guy that's taken a program in Louisiana that the serious fan probably at least had heard of, but may not necessarily have realized was a pretty darn good school, given the right guy in charge and a little bit of money for resources. And he made them a serious contender for the Sun Belt title every single season he was there.
Yep.
The other thing I respect Napier for is he waited. He didn't jump at the first shiny object that got thrown his way, because he's had a couple of shiny objects thrown his way over the last couple of seasons. He waited for one that could be a home run hit for him, that he could take and knock out of the park. And I think this is it. I really like the move for Florida. Look for them, maybe not this next year to be all of a sudden this big Georgia level program, but when we come back and have this conversation 3 years from now, we may be talking about them on that same level.
As the Florida State alum on the show, I cannot endorse saying your sentence that it is a good move for that particular university. I will say it's a good move for Billy Napier.
Understood. Not being a gigantic fan of said university either. Not super thrilled about it, but I respect the move.
Get it?
And I
Yes,
know
completely.
the big picture, what it brings to things. It brings a good coach to the table, to the SEC table at that. Before we hit this next announcement, time for the breaking news again. Yep, that's right. We have more breaking news, and this time it's a coach leaving a potential opportunity to go to the SEC to go to the Pac-12. Lincoln Riley, just probably nothing, less than 24 hours after going out publicly and saying that, nope, I'm not going to LSU. I'm not going to be the head coach at LSU. And I love the administration at Oklahoma. Well, he's no longer the head coach at the University of Oklahoma, because multiple reports are quoting multiple different sources saying that Monday morning he's going to be announced as the new head coach at USC.
Yep.
That's an earth shaker.
Yeah, and on it's a bunch of different levels, and I know that we can get into that in the B block or even hell later in this segment because of everything that shakes. Because Lincoln Riley will win the press conference, and he fits the glitz and glamour that's associated with Southern Cal. And after they got rid of Clay Helton, who is now at your alma mater, that you had to hit a home run with your hire, and so USC has done that, which now opens up the job at Oklahoma. And that presents some interesting thoughts. And I know that J-Dub is probably wringing his hands over the notion of, say, a Josh Heupel leaving Tennessee and heading to Oklahoma. No, you say?
From what I understand, there's a little bit of history between Mr. Heupel and his former alma mater, and not all of it good. That being said, money could talk. And that carousel part question is something for the conversation here in the second block. We'll stick to Riley and USC. That could be a game changer for the Pac-12, in my opinion.
Well, I think so, but I mean, and I think you bring the Big 12 / now soon to be SEC recruiting challenges. You bring that recruiting base, and you can have the opportunity to shield it west and take some of the talent from the middle of the country and work it toward the Pac-10, 12, 14.
Well, the flip side of it, all that talent in the Los Angeles area and in Southern California that's been floating back toward the east.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you've got one of the best offensive minds in college football coaching at the primo school on the West Coast.
True. And, it gives the opportunity for USC to take the talent that was leaving. It gives them a chance to stay at home for a chance. And so you have all of these seismic shifts, and we're not even waiting until Cyber Monday for all of this stuff to start happening. And I think that, when you have your elements in place, what you're doing is you're trying to make sure that your news isn't dwarfed by any kind of a conference championship or game or a CFP announcement on Tuesday. So you're going to go ahead and make your announcements now and get things squared away. What else is on your mind? Because I've got another breaking news sounder myself when we're done talking about Oklahoma and USC.
Yes, and I know what that's going to be, and we'll get to that here in just a quick second. The other interesting thing about Riley moving from Oklahoma is it basically says that he doesn't want to compete in the SEC. And I get that. You're talking about taking the top dog in the Big 12 and sticking in the middle, sticking them potentially in an already dangerous and cutthroat SEC West, where you may not necessarily be the big dog
Hmm.
year in and year out. This year's Oklahoma team, my guess, probably would have been 7-5, maybe 6-6 in the
Yeah.
SEC West.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like he doesn't want any part of that. And I can't say that I blame him. The other part of that is he's kind of following the Cliff Kingsbury route in
Hmm.
that he's going from being this great offensive mind at Oklahoma to USC. And then the next step for him may end up being the NFL. Um, Everything about that hire I like.
Yeah.
USC, if they can become relevant again, changes the game in the Pac-12.
Hmm.
If they can compete with Oregon and or beat Oregon, all of a sudden you're talking about it. You're talking about maybe getting the Pac-12 back into the college football playoff, which is a thing that they have not been able to do for multiple years.
Hmm.
Now I'll cue up the breaking news alert yet again for your breaking news.
After 14 seasons at Duke, David Cutcliffe is out, and he reached 6 bowl games in his tenure. The longtime coach there went 3-9 in 2021. The towel waving Trooper Taylor, say that 10 times fast, will be the interim coach
Really?
for right now, according to Brandon Marcello. Trooper Taylor is going to serve as interim head coach. So um, you will have towel waving at Duke until they come up with a new head coach at Duke. And I think that when you look at what David Cutcliffe has been able to accomplish at Duke, then all you really can do is tip your hat, because it is one of the most difficult situations to navigate as a head coach,
And have
because
success.
and have success. And I mean, when success sometimes is bowl eligibility, being above 500, cracking the rankings, possibly chasing after a division championship in the ACC. I cannot do anything but give David Cutcliffe a boatload of credit and a tip of the hat for everything that he was able to do at Duke for all that time.
And truly one of the nicest, most respected people in the college football game. We've had multiple interactions with him over the years, and he has been nothing but a first-class person. Everybody that you talk to about the man says nothing but great things. He's been around college football almost as long as we've been alive, if not longer.
Yep, 77 and 97 with 6 bowl appearances since he was hired before the 2008 season. Previously, the head coach at Ole Miss, won the program's first bowl game since 1961 and 2015. Program record 10 wins in 2013 with an ACC championship game appearance. But in the last 2 seasons, Duke was 1-17 in the ACC and 0-8 in 2021. Associate head coach is the title that Trooper Taylor has, and he will serve as interim head coach.
Indeed, he will. I'm sure over the course of the next 48 hours, we're probably going to see a little bit more changes going on, because we are at that point. We are quickly approaching, as we record this, Black Monday for college football coaches, the day where if you're going to lose your job as a head coach, this is when it's going to happen,
Yep.
right after the season ends.
Mm-hmm.
There are multiple other coaches who are on that hot seat, the proverbial hot seat still. And all these moves create openings for coaches potentially to leave their current job and move on to others, which is something we'll discuss a little bit further in the B block. But since this is the review and the first half of our show talks about the week that was in the world of college football, that's what we're going to do now. So it was rivalry week. It was the week where everybody plays their big quote unquote fan base game where they pay rivals.
Rivals. Yes.
And we had some interesting games, and I'm going to go ahead and start it off with the Big Ten game, and I'm going to beat my chest a little bit because I predicted this.
There you go.
And that's Michigan beating Ohio State in the Big House, 42-27, in an impressive defensive performance by the Wolverines, setting them up for a potential college football playoff berth. Jim Harbaugh finally gets over the big game choking hurdle that he's been living with for the last however long.
Yeah.
and exposed Ohio State's defense a little bit.
Ohio State is vanquished. 42-27 is the score, and the Wolverines are going to go to Indianapolis.
Yeah, 3-17 in their last 20. Michigan going up against Ohio State. And all, frankly, that matters to the Michigan fan is the fact that they beat Ohio State this week. That's all that matters. All you have to do is watch Rich Eisen on NFL Sunday morning. And they were trying to run a whole bunch of 20-year smack on Rich, and Rich was like, nope, don't care. You can talk about it all you want. You're not going to ding me today because we beat Ohio State, understandably so. So big win for them. And I think that when you look at subtext and context with what we're staring at with this particular matchup, then you're looking at, okay, what about CJ Stroud and his Heisman hopes? Those kinds of things in the subtext of what was going on with the game on Saturday. And I think that when you have Stroud throw
By
for
the
three.
way, was that not an all-time classic, old school Big Ten in the snow matchup?
Well, there's that one, and then the Michigan State game in East Lansing against Penn State, which to me was even better because you still had the classic uniforms, you had all of the contrasting with Michigan State and the classic unis and all that. But yeah, as it got later in the day in the state of Michigan and the snow picked up, the nighttime, the late afternoon and the early evening stuff out of East Lansing was a treat as well, as Michigan State would go on to win 30-27. But for me, you look at Ohio State, C.J. Stroud threw for 394 and 2. Haskins runs for 5 touchdowns as he runs for 169 yards. And so, not a surprise, but I think that Michigan scoring 28 points in the second half, I think that should give Ohio State fans and the coaching staff reason to think about what happened in the third and fourth quarter as the defense pretty much could not slow down Michigan in the second half.
That was the reason why I took Michigan in this game. Ohio State's defense has struggled all season long. Stroud has been fantastic on offense. They've got a boatload of wide receivers, all of whom are going to be in the NFL, all of whom can run like the wind and catch footballs. But you can't win if you can't stop people, and they couldn't stop anybody. At the end of the day, Michigan did what they had to do. They just ground it down their throat with Hassan Haskins.
Yep.
And that this year in college football, that matters.
Yeah.
It's not been the year where somebody's winning games 68-62, not games that matter anyway.
Right.
It's the year where the big name teams and the teams that we're talking about as potential college football playoff teams are winning their games because they're just running it down people's throat.
Yeah. If you can choke the life out of a game this season specifically, and you have confidence in your running game and you have confidence in your offensive line, these are the games where you can, snap up and bite a rival, snap up and get an upset over a ranked team. And it just comes to the notion of your center of gravity is lower than my center of gravity, and I'm just going to manipulate the line of scrimmage and just make sure that I can take up as much clock as possible. And I think that when you have teams that aren't as stacked, in quotation marks, as your opponent, if you can work the clock, if you can run the ball and get key third down conversions, then you're going to choke the life out of games, and you're going to see games like we saw this past weekend.
We'll talk about a low-scoring game that you attended this weekend here in a second, but I just want to mention Georgia took care of business in their rivalry game against Georgia Tech. No real surprise there, 45-0 in a game that wasn't even really that close. Georgia Tech couldn't do anything against the Georgia defense. Also not a surprise. No. Stetson Bennett IV with his 4-touchdown performance. 4. Easy win for Georgia, good tune-up. They got George Pickens, their leading wide receiver from the last 2 seasons, back to play got it in a few plays ahead of their SEC championship game next week.
Yep.
And speaking of that SEC championship game, the Georgia Bulldogs, who have been the most dominant team in college football in the regular season, going 12-0, will play the Alabama Crimson Tide, who you got to see in person against Auburn at Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
For roughly, 58 minutes was one
Yeah.
of the ugliest games in college football history.
No, it's still an ugly game, even though it went past the 60-minute mark. But let me go back to your Georgia Tech point before I get into Iron Bowl here. The fact that Jeff Collins is returning for Georgia Tech, I know that's causing a great deal of consternation for a lot of folks. He is overturning his coaching staff, and
Because they can't afford to buy him out.
right. So here's the rundown off of that 3-9 season. OC Dave Patino, coach DC Nathan Burton, cornerbacks coach Jeff Popovich, all fired. And so you're looking at the 3 seasons. Tech hasn't finished above 500, has an overall record of 9-25. And this season, second worst offense in the ACC in terms of points per game at 24. Defense gave up the most passing yards per attempt in the conference, per attempt at
And they've
almost
outscored their final 2 games 110-0.
Yeah. So, of course, that
Or
means
100-0, I'm sorry.
well, but still, I think that then, of course, all of that translates into Jeff Collins shaking up his staff instead of Jeff Collins leaving because of the reason that you gave. Now, to the Iron Bowl, real quick. And honestly, I think the more disturbing scene, if I am in the athletic department at Georgia Tech, were all of the Georgia fans who were at Grant Field. And if you find one of the photographs that has been making the rounds, there is a lot more red and black than there was old gold and navy there. And I mean, you're talking in some of the high price seats where the donors are for Georgia Tech, you were seeing Georgia folks sitting in those seats. So that for me is more of a danger sign and should be than what we were seeing on the field. Now to the Iron Bowl. The Iron Bowl in and of itself, I think that we saw some things defensively from Derek Mason and Auburn.
And it was a history maker, by the way.
Oh.
The first time in the history of that series, the game went to overtime.
Right, and I think it was the first time also that Nick Saban had to go into a 4th overtime for a result, if I'm not mistaken. There were some things that we saw dialed up from Derek Mason that we had not seen to a point this season. You saw you saw a heavily rotated defensive front 7, and you saw 5 different players register the first 6 sacks on Bryce Young. What you saw was backside pressure. You saw blindside pressure. And Alabama's offensive line did not know how to deal with that. There were points in the second quarter where the offensive linemen themselves had to be separated from each other because they were fighting on the sideline about protections and what have you, about the lack of offense that we were seeing from the University of Alabama in that first half. I think also that the targeting call that happened against Alabama was big early. I think the injury that happened in the first half was also a big one for the University of Alabama. Brian Robinson, he was injured early and he was held to 71 yards on 15 carries. And so his presence wasn't there the entire time. Although when you look at John Mechie, and I know that you have been big on Mechie for pretty much the last couple of seasons, what we saw from John Mechie was nothing short of amazing. Or
Leary in motion. The throw goes the other way. Mechie's in. Alabama wins.
Or normal, I guess, if you're an Alabama fan.
Yeah.
But when you look at the pressure that was dialed up, they got pressure with 4, meaning Auburn. Auburn got pressure with 4. They played man coverage against the receivers, and they still had two deep safeties to help out. So it was something of a modified dime package. But the pressure that they were giving on Bryce Young and keeping contained, I think, was also a big thing for making sure that Bryce Young couldn't beat you from outside the pocket. And with Robinson not being active in the running game, literally you had over 50 rushes in the game and a net yardage of close to 30 yards at some point because of all the pressure that was going on. But for that 58 minutes, that was where the defense was. You had 2 fantastic punts inside the 5-yard line, where a great deal of Alabama's yardage came from in those 2 drives. And I think that the mistake that Derek Mason made, or the Auburn coaching staff, because I don't know how high up this went, was they laid off that pressure.
In that last series.
Actually, in the last 2 is where they laid off. You didn't see the same amount of pressure dialed up that you saw in the first 58 minutes that you saw in the last two, say. In the last two drives for Alabama, so let's say 55-5 to be safe. The last two drives for Alabama, you did not see the same kind of pressure from Auburn's defense that you saw that was causing problems for Alabama in the first 3.5 quarters. And I know a lot of folks will also mention Tank Bigsby going out of bounds, which also bought Alabama an extra 40 seconds, which was all the time difference that was needed for that game-tying touchdown that sent it into overtime. And
Still
I know, no
plenty of
question.
time for Auburn to stop them, and they couldn't.
Right. And so I think that, that we discuss defense and laying off and all of that kind of stuff. Also, what you had in TJ Finley, and there are two other things as we're gradually working our way to overtime here. TJ Finley could not function on his left ankle. It had been injured early in the second half, and he literally could not scramble and could not run. So you
He
saw
could barely walk.
yeah, and so this was short of him almost having the Byron Leftwich bowl game moment from Marshall, where he could not plant, he could not put anything behind his passes in the fourth quarter, and there was a stretch with 3 passes where 2 of them were intercepted. So you're having the idea that there was no contingency plan in place for an injury to your starting quarterback, although, with the time that we spend here in the Southeast, you did have a receiver in Kobe Hudson who spent some time as a quarterback in high school. So you could simply run Wildcat or have Kobe throw or what have you. No contingency plan was made, apparently, or the one that they had confidence in enough by the Auburn coaching staff to, if TJ Finley's injured, what do you do in return? You apparently were more confident in having TJ Finley as a heavily injured quarterback in the pocket than you had with any other idea. Now to the
and the one-legged quarterback thing did not work because at the
no.
end of the day, Auburn couldn't move the ball.
No, because all you had to do was make sure that you had to stop the line of scrimmage and force TJ Finley to throw, and that was what ended up not working for Auburn. Then when you get into overtime, and it's basically, all right, you score on the throwback screen to John Samuel Schenker. I do
Which was
not
an
know.
excellent play call, by the way.
Right, but I do not know why Auburn did not go for 2. And there are the vaccination jokes that I'm going to leave to the side because they're too easy. But I do not know why Auburn did not go for 2 in the first overtime, because there was no way, with all of the evidence that we have just given you, why Auburn was going to last long term against Alabama in this game, the more overtimes and the more possessions that Alabama had.
It was the only chance they had to go for the kill shot, and they didn't take it.
Yes, and thank you for go ahead and using the reference, because I was going to go ahead and leave it alone, but thank you for using the S word as we were discussing things. But no, there were too many opportunities for Auburn to take this game from Alabama. Too many mistakes that were made by the coaching staff in their philosophy late in the game. And you end up with a team that was 6-6 challenging an Alabama team. And everyone is talking about how that last drive was Bryce Young's Heisman moment. No, it wasn't. It was against a tired defense that was laying back in coverage, and you're going up against a team in Auburn that had a one-legged quarterback, and all you had to do was press and make sure that the running game stopped. So stop with the discussion about this being Bryce Young's Heisman moment. It was not.
Yeah, I'll finish up the talk about this game because you went on for a good bit there.
I know.
But I say, because I watched the second half, a good chunk of the second half of this game myself.
Yeah.
Like we talked about, Auburn they had no chance of moving the ball. They had their opportunities. Alabama was exposed, and I give Derek Mason props for coming up with a defensive game plan that mirrored a lot of what Texas A&M did against Alabama when they beat them down in College Station earlier in the season.
Yep.
And I think this exposed Alabama a little bit.
Question. Absolutely.
This is the first time I've really seen a Nick Saban team that has some weakness, and that weakness can be exploited. I'll be curious to see what they do this coming week as they play Georgia in the SEC Championship game, a game that we'll talk about here in the second half of the show, because we need to move on to some other stuff while we still can. And before we do that, though, it's time for Wilkie's World. It's the time where we toss to Brother Wilkie, where he gives his thoughts on what happened this week in the world of college football.
Thanks, guys. there were a couple of games in rivalry week that really stood out to me. One was Bedlam, Oklahoma State and Oklahoma. This is probably the most one-sided rivalry in the history of college football, as Oklahoma's dominated OSU throughout the series. But Oklahoma State finally got it done. Now, you thought in the third quarter, the way as inept offensively and on both sides of the ball, really, Oklahoma State looked in the third quarter, you thought, well, this is another Oklahoma win. But OSU came back in the fourth quarter. I think this is a huge win for Oklahoma State. It's a major hurdle for the Cowboys to get over. And it happened right at the end of the season in the rivalry game. And now Oklahoma State gets to go to the Big 12 championship game in Dallas to take on Baylor. They don't get the rematch with Oklahoma, which is huge. And so now going up against Baylor, I think is psychologically going to be great for the Cowboys. Baylor's a good team, but Oklahoma State got over a major, major hurdle, and it turned out to be a great game as well in Stillwater. And the fans stormed the field, and it was a beautiful thing. So I think this is a huge boost for Oklahoma State as they try to get into the college football playoff. And now to the coaching carousel, and so many top jobs are open right now. Not Southern Cal. I think everybody was kind of taken aback when Lincoln Riley decided to take that job, but I'm not surprised. I think it's a great move for Lincoln Riley. Think about it. You go to Southern Cal, which is really LA's football team. Let's face it. The Stars want to be seen at the Coliseum for a USC game than at SoFi for a Rams-Chargers game. So he's going into a place that is high profile. And it's the gold standard program in the Pac-12. That's the luster is there's luster on that program now. It's not the shiny toy it used to be, but Lincoln Riley sees an opportunity to bring USC back into college football's elite. And he feels he's the coach to do that. And I wouldn't be surprised if he did. He's got all that talent in Southern California to pick from, and he has a system. And quarterbacks like that system that he runs, and he's developed some Heisman Trophy winners. So I think it's a win-win for Southern Cal and Lincoln Riley. He gets a chance to build his own program in L.A. So I think he's going to do really well there. And not saying that USC is going to be back, but they're going to be somewhere close to their dominant selves if Lincoln Riley does what he did in Oklahoma. So now Oklahoma has an opening there, and Cliff Kingsbury's name has been thrown around as a potential replacement. Look, Oklahoma, where their success has come in Oklahoma, has been with these brilliant-minded coaches that have some personality. I mean, I think of Barry Switzer and Bob Stoops right off the bat, two highly successful Oklahoma coaches that had a little personality to them, had a little edge to them. And I was wondering if that's going to be part of what Oklahoma is going to be looking for. But the same familiar names are going to be mentioned. I'm sure some NFL guys will be that are assistants will be mentioned as well. I think of Eric Bieniemy right off the bat. But now Oklahoma is looking for a head coach. Be interesting to see who they get. And Billy Napier finally gets his big time job in the SEC. It's going to be an interesting fit with Florida, but Billy Napier is the guy that was kind of just waiting around to see what opened up and see what was out there. And Florida was a great opportunity for him. He had a successful run in Louisiana, and now he's going to go to Florida where he has all that talent, high school talent to pick from. And I think he's got the demeanor to be able to withstand some of the slings and arrows that come from Florida's boosters and fans and even the administration, because Steve Spurrier set the standard and Urban Meyer kept it going with winning national championships and winning SEC championships and challenging Alabama. And that has kind of gone by the wayside in the last 10, 15 years. And even Georgia, I mean, their rival, they haven't been able to hang with their own rival. So I think this is a really good move for both parties. Be interesting to see how Billy Napier develops it. And, of course, he comes from the Saban coaching tree. So can he be the one that challenges his mentor as well. But I think it's a good move by both parties. One sad thing that I wanted to mention about the coaching carousel is Duke and David Cutcliffe decided to part ways. And anybody who's been around Coach Cutcliffe knows what a class individual he was. I was associated with the ACC for 15 years. I remember walking into their facility when Ted Roof was a head coach and wondering what kind of Division I program is this? Will they ever get their act right? And they did when they hired Coach Cutcliffe. And winning a division title and getting Duke into the ACC championship game was a huge, huge accomplishment. And just the way Wallace Wade Stadium looks now, the indoor facility, several winning seasons and bowl games and developing talent at Duke. He did a wonderful job there. And, of course, it's hard to win consistently at schools like Duke. And obviously that's the case. And after this season, both parties decided to part ways. And it's sad to see Coach Cutcliffe leave Durham. And we'll see what they hire at Duke. But it's kind of sad to see Coach Cutcliffe go. The coaching carousel is going to keep spinning. There's a lot of great jobs out there. And I can't wait to see who lands where. The other game in rivalry week was North Carolina and North Carolina State in Raleigh. Now, this is a very underserved rivalry. Not a whole lot of people know about this rivalry nationwide, but it's a very petty rivalry. It's very underserved, I think, nationally. And the two teams put on a show Friday night in Raleigh. And I thought with about a little less than 2 minutes left in the game when Carolina went up by 2 scores that this was over. But what a performance by the NC State offense. They saw that they still had a chance at the ACC title game, and they scored 2 touchdowns, the Wolfpack did, in 26 seconds to stun North Carolina. And the Tar Heels still had a chance to win the game, but it wasn't to be. Again, a huge win for NC State. Unfortunately, it didn't put them in the ACC championship game as Wake Forest took care of business the next day against Boston College. So the Demon Deacons will play Pitt in Charlotte for the ACC championship. But what a great game. And it just goes to show how good that rivalry, North Carolina State is.
Thanks for that, Brother Wilkie. We always appreciate you, sir. Wish you could join us here live, but always glad to see you do the tape drops. I think, John, this is the point where we're going to kind of go to halftime.
I think so.
We've talked about a lot. We've got a lot of ground to cover because there's still quite a few games that matter in the world of college football this past weekend.
Yeah.
And we still need to talk a little bit more about the coaching carousel and look ahead to Conference Championship Saturday. All that and more when we come back for the second half of the review. You are listening to The Review on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network.
The OSG app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. Install the OSG app and listen to our podcast from college football, soccer, and lacrosse. What are you waiting for? Download the OSG app today.
If you've been hurt in a car wreck, contact my friend Steve Apolinski of Apolinski & Associates. He's been representing individuals for over 30 years throughout Georgia and Alabama. Email him at steve@aa-legal.com or call him 24/7 at 404-377-9191. The initial consultation is free.
We know that every driver is different, and a one-size policy does not fit all. That's why Country Financial offers a variety of discounts, so you get the coverage you need and the savings you deserve. From good driver to good student, multi-policy to multi-car, we've got a discount to suit every driver. Call Jason Wright at 678-568-6871 today to see what you could save. On Facebook at Jason Wright Agency or by phone at 678-568-6871. Discounts vary by state. Policies issued by Country Mutual Insurance Company, Country Preferred Insurance Company, or Country Casualty Insurance Company, Bloomington, Illinois.
As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly.
Thanks for sticking around, everybody. You have made it to the second half of the show. You are, of course, listening to the review on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network with us, featuring the online sports guys, me, OSG Phil, him, OSG Nelson. Brother Wilkie joined us in the first half of the show via the magic of editing. Brother J-Dub, we couldn't edit out his technical difficulties, so he won't be joining us this week.
Couldn't edit him in either.
What's that?
We couldn't edit his technical difficulties in either.
That too. Hopefully he'll join us next week live on the show when we record it. But John, in the first block of the show, we talked a little bit. We talked a lot. We had a bunch of breaking news that we had to kind of blow through, and then we talked about some of the bigger games in the world of college football. Probably the next on the list of big games that we did not get to, and that's Bedlam.
Bedlam.
Talked about Lincoln Riley, the now former coach or soon-to-be former coach at the Oklahoma Sooners, and his team lost Bedlam to Oklahoma State in Stillwater, 37-33.
Makes a cut, first down, still running. Spencer Sanders all the way to the house.
Big win for the Cowboys, who have not beaten Oklahoma in quite some time. They score 13 points unanswered in the fourth quarter to take the trophy and put themselves in position to potentially make it into the college football playoff.
Yeah, they do. And that was, I think, the other element in all of this, with Oklahoma State winning the game against their rival. And, the craziness that we saw in the first half, where it was 24 apiece by the time we got to intermission. Oklahoma then makes a statement in the third quarter, clamping down on Oklahoma State. And then the fourth quarter, in return, in the back and forth, just happens at a quarter at a time instead of a possession at a time, as it was in the first half. So, you got to give Mike Gundy a lot of credit. His record in Bedlam as a player and as an assistant and as a head coach is abysmal. ABYSMAL, abysmal. Awful.
That's bad for those of you who don't want to look up the meaning of the word.
Bad. Worse than bad. Worse than bad. Awful. Like, oh my God, awful. And so for them to get this win, right now you're at 11-1 heading into the Big 12 championship. And so now, all right, when you get into championship Saturday, this is that opportunity where you're sitting there and it's like, all right, we have something here in front of us that we can take full advantage of. And the notion that you're now going up against Baylor at AT&T, that's going to be big coming up next Saturday as one of your early kickoffs. For those of you who are planning your Saturday viewing habits, Baylor and Oklahoma State should be a good one at AT&T, but good work by Oklahoma State winning Bedlam considering their past history.
Yeah, and speaking of Baylor, they did get the win this week. They were ranked number 8 going into the week. A huge win for them as they eke out a victory over Texas Tech without their starting quarterback. And that in itself was quite the accomplishment. They did what they needed to do in order to get the win.
I mean, they took care. They needed to get it done in the fourth quarter in a very, very back and forth game, and they end up getting that win. Blake Shapen goes 20 of 34 for 254 with 2 scores, but you also had a running game that complemented you just as well. You had 180 net on the ground. Abram Smith ran for 117. So this was one of those where, all right, so are you contender or pretender? And Baylor, with a win against a team that was 6-5 coming in, 3-5 in the conference, I think that it shows that Baylor can win these kind of grinders. And I think it's
with
important.
A backup quarterback.
Yeah, with a backup quarterback. And so I think that that's a big thing for Baylor in this case, that they can win games like this going forward.
We talked a little bit about Michigan State. They beat Penn State 30-27. The Cincinnati Bearcats, another team that is looking better by the day for being that first group of 5 team to make it to the college football playoff. They took care of business against East Carolina, 35-13, a good win for the Bearcats. They are 12-0. They finished the regular season with an unblemished record and a good win over a top 10 Notre Dame team at Notre Dame. Is it their berth to lose at this point as one of the 4 teams?
I mean, I'd like to say yes, considering that they've got,
But we know the
considering.
college football playoff committee doesn't do things that make a whole lot of sense to the rest of the universe.
No, and you've got a home game against Houston next Saturday to see if you can go 13-0. I'd like to say that you should not ignore 13-0, but with Michigan hanging around, and Oklahoma State hanging around, and everybody hanging around right in those margins, you're kind of sitting there and going, okay, as we always reference, doing what's best for business. Is business what's best for business? A number 5 Michigan, a number 7 Oklahoma State, or is it Cinderella as a number 4 Cincinnati? And these numbers are the ones that I'm saying as we are talking and recording, not in the future tense. But when you look at these numbers, the CFP is going to decide what is best for business. And I fear that Cincinnati, if their win is not impressive against Houston at home next Saturday, you could see that team at number 5 kind of work their way in, and then all of a sudden Cincinnati drops to number 5, and then there's some anger and angst out of the state of Ohio. So no, it is going to be an interesting subplot to all of this going forward.
Yeah, best case scenario for Cincinnati is I think that Baylor wins the Big 12.
Correct.
Iowa wins the Big 10.
Mm-hmm.
And then the path is clear.
Yep.
At that point. But there's no guarantee that's going to happen.
Mm-mm.
And one thing we haven't talked, one conference championship we didn't talk about.
Because it's about a 40-second soundbite.
Yeah, that's the ACC championship, and Wake Forest will be playing in that ACC championship game. Despite losing last week to Clemson, they bounced back a huge win over Boston College, 41-10 up in Chestnut Hill. Nice performance, bounce back performance for Sam Hartman.
Yep.
An interesting matchup now is you got Wake Forest playing Pitt in Charlotte for the ACC championship game.
Yeah, 17 versus 18. And once again, these are the rankings pre-CFP discussion midweek. Wake finishes at 7-1, solid effort across the board. Hartman throws 20 of 32 for 236 and 3 just to kind of get in and get out the door. And Pitt, they finish up 10-2, 28 points in the middle 2 quarters, knocking off Syracuse, who finishes at 5-7 with a 31-14 win there. So you have 2 offenses that are prone to slinging it around the yard pretty much. So, of course, the fact that we're talking about these 2 quarterbacks means it's probably going to be something in the 17-13 vein because weather's going to come in or something's going to happen and make it an abysmal watch.
Before we look ahead at Conference Championship Saturday, we might as well finish up our conversation about the college football coaching carousel because it's going to be an issue here over the next few days. We talked early about Billy Napier taking the Florida job, Lincoln Riley going to be moving from Oklahoma to USC. We talked about Coach Cutt leaving Duke. A few more jobs in play. Ed Orgeron coached his last game this week at LSU.
He's heading to Destin. He doesn't care.
Where he can buy all the hamburgers he wants, according to him.
True.
And there's nothing wrong with that, to be quite honest. LSU running out of candidates for that job because both Riley and Napier were 2 of the bigger names considered for it.
Mm-hmm.
Not really sure where they turn at this point.
Well, that's the interesting thought. And, where do you go here? Is it, who would want to jump from their conference to come take a gig at LSU? I've heard some insanely wild things like Lane Kiffin moving from Ole Miss. I think Lane Kiffin goes to Miami, frankly, after the season's over. That's just me. So LSU for me is a big question mark. It honestly is. I don't know what Baton Rouge does now when it comes to their new head coach. And as we discussed in the beginning of the show with Billy Napier and the Hornets' nest that is currently Baton Rouge, who wants to go in there? It's going to have to be someone who's incredibly confident in their own abilities, and especially what they were able to build at their previous job. But the question is is LSU going to give whomever this individual is, Coach X, Coach, branded Coach X, is that going to, are they going to be given a lot of patience to build a program and make it succeed? That in and of itself are the two big questions for me. Who's confident enough to want to go in there to LSU, and is LSU going to be patient enough with that individual? And will the fan base even accept who that new
That's the big,
coach is?
yeah, that's
Because
the big question to me.
that coach has to win the fan base before they even win the press conference. You have to win the hire before you even acknowledge that the hire happened with the pomp and circumstance of the press conference. So that's another element in all of this for me.
Because they have been connected to just about everybody in the college football world, from Mel Tucker on through the list, none of whom are available for them at this time. Tucker's getting ready to sign a gigantic extension at Michigan State, nearly $100 million, which is kind of a borderline obscene for me for a college football coach, but I guess that's another conversation for another day.
A&M, Texas.
Jimbo Fisher isn't leaving Texas A&M to go to LSU at this point in time. There's no reason for him to do that in a rational world. And after that, who do you hire? Who are you going to pull away from their high publicity job to come down to Baton Rouge and take on that mess?
That's the other question in all of this. Who is going to want to take the job at LSU and come from another conference to do it? I mean, I know that Luke Fickell's name's probably going to be danced around with what he's doing at Cincinnati.
And he's not even going to be available until next month, until January.
And that's the thing. It's like, who is A, available? Who is B, willing to leave their current job, and C, dive into LSU? That's the big things that are dancing around right now. Is that you've got to. It's almost what we've seen in other sports. Other teams, there were teams in other leagues that have had the same exact situation, where, okay, well, if we don't make the move now, then we're not going to get the guy that we want that's number one on our list. And so the school makes the jump. They grab the number one guy on their list, which sets up a domino, which sets up, okay, who's number two on our list, because number one is no longer available. And because number one or number two on our list took a wild card job, that means we're down to at least our third choice. And who is that third choice? And is the third choice even interested in A, leaving, and
well,
B?
I can sum this all up in one quote from the movie Talladega Nights: if you ain't winning, you're losing.
Yeah. If second place is first loser, and that's where a lot of coaches and a lot of schools are right now, because they didn't get their first choice when it came to their coach when Carousel opened up.
Yeah, Scott Woodward's been traveling the country waving around big pockets of money to people, and nobody's been willing to take him up on it at this point. I'll be interested to see where that goes. Those are the really high-profile jobs. There's still the Virginia Tech job out there. Not quite on the same level as LSU. Now that Lincoln Riley's leaving Oklahoma, somebody's going to have to take that job. Wondering if... sorry, I just got a push alert from ESPN saying that Cliff Kingsbury's on the Oklahoma Sooners radar.
Why?
And we're talking about Cliff Kingsbury as in the guy who's the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, currently the team with the best record in the NFC.
Yeah.
Head coach.
Yeah.
It's good to be optimistic, but that's, I think, just a smidge too cheerful in the outlook.
Yes.
I mean, I guess I could be wrong. Stranger things have happened, but
True.
that would be that might take the cake.
Well, but that's the thing. It's like, all right, so let's set up all of our ideas and figure out what the heck's going on, and let's just throw names out there to see if they stick at this point.
One question for you before we move on from the coaching carousel, and it's a name that's attached to potentially the job at the University of Washington, and that's Brian Harsin.
Yeah.
I know you've said before that some faction of the Auburn alumni would not be too heartbroken.
And it is a growing number as well.
Is that a realistic play?
Well, but I mean, let's go back and look at the history here. Chris Peterson is apparently the name that is floating Brian Harsin to take over at the University of Washington. We all know the relationship that the two of them have. And it is going to be a question for Brian Harsin to figure out, okay, do I follow my mentor and follow my mentor's advice and go back into Pacific time zone football and do it at the University of Washington? I mean, that's the pull here. And there is also there's also a groundswell on campus to possibly see that this hire has been so disastrous, it might even be the end of Alan Green as athletic director at the Auburn University campus as well. So there are knock on effects to this idea. And if Harsin goes and he goes back to the University of Washington, that does kind of free up the coffers a little bit to try and chase after another coach. But once again, it goes back to the knock-on effects of who would that coach be? Because the names that are out there have already gone to other places. So that's what we're staring at right now is, let's just say that Harsin goes back to UW, goes back to the Pacific Northwest, gets the job at UW. Then for Alan Green, who was maligned for this hire, who does he chase after and get them in to be the head coach at Auburn? Because if I'm not mistaken, then that would be the fourth coach that you would be currently paying money to. So, you're spending more money after money, and maybe because if Harsin was to take the job at Washington, you wouldn't have to pay him anymore. Or there might be a temporary buyout or something like that, not as much as it would have been otherwise. So there are a lot of knock-on effects here in all of this. So Auburn would have to look at this in two dimensions, or basically two separate lanes of traffic. All right. So if Harsin was to leave, then who do we hire? Or do we hang on to him because he said all the right things in the press conference mentioning recruit in the offseason? Of course, if you were to discuss that with Dan Mullen would sit there and challenge you and sit there and say recruiting is not important during the season. And we know where that got him, to the unemployment line with a rather
don't
large
forget, he's
buyout.
Darth Vader.
That is true, unless Eli Drinkwitz has something to say about it. So there are a lot of knock-on effects here because all of the prime candidates, unless you can pry someone away from their current job, are already out of play, and you'd have to come up and once again try to get the next big thing that's an up-and-coming coach, unless you go back into the retread pile, and we've seen how successful that can be. So there's a lot of things at play here when it comes to Auburn University.
Yeah. They would quickly join that boat that LSU is currently occupying.
No doubt. It's like,
hey,
all right, so you get rid of the coach. Who do you get?
SEC. Do you want to come work for us? Who dis?
Yeah. It's like, sorry, I'm going to put you over here on line 2, and that individual will take your phone call.
Yeah, just don't see that. Well, I could see where Harsin would leave, and I wouldn't totally blame him if he did.
Well, I mean, I just don't think it's been a good fit.
No.
It has not been a good fit, and so that's why I mentioned what I mentioned about the athletic director Alan Green, because this was his baby. And if this hasn't fit, then you're going to have a fan base and boosters sit there and say, well, if you can't get a hire right after we dismiss our coach, why should we trust you with the next hire, considering what you did with this hire? So, like I said, there's a couple of knock-on effects, not just on the field, but in the glass houses and the offices too.
Yeah, once we get through talking about games, we really need to devote a podcast to talk about the churn of college football coaching, because there's an episode there to be discussed. There's so many things that are wrong with the way college football operates when it comes to college to their coaching, and all the problems that we just mentioned in the last 5 minutes are reasons why I think people are absolutely bananas to take a job at a major university as a college football head coach.
Yeah,
because it's certain places and it's always the same schools that are looking for somebody.
Yep.
And there's a reason for that. But to me, that's an hour-long show that we need to have a conversation about here with the guys.
That's what the off season's about.
Yes. So that all being said, we will move on and look ahead as we approach college football championship week, and a busy week it will be.
we all know what Cincinnati is up against. They want to be the first Group of 5 team to make the playoff, and they're in that position to do that. And they've done what they have to do to keep that lofty status. But I think in the title game, it's going to be a tough chore for the Bearcats to be able to blow out Houston. This Houston team is flying way, way under the radar and hasn't even been noticed in their own conference because of what Cincinnati is doing. This is going to be a tough chore for Cincinnati because Houston's got a pretty potent defense and a pretty potent offense as well. Dana Hogerson's done a great job building that program up to the status where the Cougars are. I think this is going to be a tough game for Cincinnati, and I really think that Houston has more than a puncher's chance of winning this game and spoiling Cincinnati's dream season. But don't underestimate the Bearcats. They're a mentally tough team. They know what they've had to go up against, and they've taken care of business. And this week is going to be focused for the Bearcats to beat the Cougars and do something that no Group of 5 team has been able to do, and that is make the playoff. It's going to be a good game to watch, though. The other championship game I'm really interested in is the Big Ten championship game between Michigan and Iowa. Now, I think Michigan is on a major roll right now, clearing that Ohio State hurdle under the Jim Harbaugh era. Iowa is a team I was very high on at the beginning, and I still like Iowa, but they've had some false starts here and there and some bad losses, but they have a chance to win the Big Ten title, and that's all you ask for. And they have no hope of a playoff, but Michigan does. Now, Iowa's got a pretty stout defense, but the offense has been kind of inconsistent all year. I just think Michigan is on a major roll right now. That win over Ohio State really catapulted the Wolverines, and I think they take care of business against Iowa, but I don't think it's going to be easy. And I think Iowa sees a chance to redeem some of the things that happened this year, a chance to win the Big Ten title and kind of smooth those over a little bit. And, of course, the SEC championship game between Alabama and Georgia. Anytime those two get together and it means something, it's going to be a classic. We saw it a few years back when they played in the SEC title game in Atlanta, a great game by Georgia. And then they meet a month later in the same facility for the national championship in what I termed SEC Nirvana, and it was. And it was a classic overtime game with the Crimson Tide winning. I don't expect anything more than a classic game. The Alabama team you saw against Auburn, that was a team that was probably just wasn't focused. That was the most sloppy Alabama team I've seen in the Nick Saban era, and I think a lot of people had that same conclusion when it was over with. But Alabama is, look, it's going to be hell week in practice this week in Alabama after that performance. So what do you think an Alabama team is going to look like against Georgia? Georgia needs this game to continue the momentum into their national championship chances. And I really like Georgia in this game. I really do. That defense is as elite as you could get in college football. And the offense has all the weapons in the world that you want. And what you saw against Georgia Tech was peak performance right there. They're peaked and ready for the championship run. So I really like Georgia in this game.
The week kicks off with the Confusa title game.
Oh, Texas San Antonio, you had it right there.
Yeah, and then they laid the biggest of eggs, getting destroyed by North Texas the past week.
Mean
Still
Woo,
playing for the
by
conference
God,
championship at the Alamo
yeah,
Dome
I know,
against Western Kentucky. But
it's a home game. But yeah, it will be interesting to me to see how Texas San Antonio responds to that loss to the Mean Green. After you lay an egg, are you, do you sit there and you just kind of like, nah, screw it for the rest of the season? Or do you turn things around and turn Western Kentucky into an example? So, it's a home game. We saw how tough the UAB game was for Texas San Antonio. They had to win it at the death, basically. Then you get wiped, the floor wiped with you by the Mean Green, who then become bowl eligible at 6-6 with that win after starting their season out 0-5. How does Texas San Antonio respond? That's my biggest question.
Yep. And then the other Friday night game, the Pac-12 championship featuring Oregon and Utah in Las Vegas at the Raiders Stadium.
Yeah, and we've seen both of these teams. Um, we've seen both versions of both of these teams, and what version of Oregon are we going to get? The one that got wiped by Utah, or one that responds to what happened first time these two teams played?
Yep. Utah's improved over the course of the season. Oregon's been a little shaky at times, but have won their games. Hard to pick this one. This is going to be a kind of a toss-up, see how the week develops kind of a game.
Mm.
Moving on to Saturday, the first two games of the championship Saturday starts with the Big 12 championship game, Baylor and Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State wins this game. They still have themselves a shot at sneaking into the college football playoff. Losing, they're out. Love what Dave Aranda's done with Baylor. Gotten them as a contender here within 2 seasons, and he may be a job. We talked about the LSU job earlier in the carousel conversation, and we didn't
Yeah,
mention him. And if anybody ends up taking that job that's got a current job, he would be the guy because he was Ed Orgeron's defensive coordinator just 2 seasons ago.
that would make sense with the history lesson, but once again, with what Dave Aranda's building in Waco, do you want to deal with the nonsense in Baton Rouge? That's the big question.
Indeed, it is. The MAC championship game, also a noon kickoff on ESPN in Detroit, Michigan, featuring Kent State and Northern Illinois.
I love me my action, but really, I think what the winner of this one ends up going to return to Ford Field, perhaps for Motor City. So it's like, okay, I've got to go with the Huskies in that one. I don't have any of the early Thanksgiving. Actually, sorry, since we're past Thanksgiving, it would be any of the early Christmas juice box numbers attached. But I've got to go with Northern here in a tight one.
Yeah, kind of leaning the same way there. Mountain West, Utah State versus San Diego State. I like San Diego State in this one. They've had a good season so far. I don't see that changing with Utah State coming in. I could be wrong. The Aztecs go San Diego State 11-1 on the regular season.
Yep.
I like what they're doing. They played very, 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 very well in the Mountain West. Their only loss, a loss to Fresno. Take San Diego State in this one. Sun Belt Championship game. App State and Louisiana again. Louisiana will be without Billy Napier as they play the game in Lafayette. With Napier playing at Cajun Field, I would take the Cajuns in the game, but without him, I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I think that that's how I would look at it too. I've got to go with the visitors there just because of the exit of Billy Napier.
I hate to say it that way, and I'm sure Michelle's not going to be happy with me for saying it that way, but look for App State for the win. SEC championship game, Georgia versus Alabama, here in the hometown of the OSG sports team, Atlanta.
Georgia.
Yeah.
Especially after what we saw on Saturday.
Until proven otherwise, I just don't see anybody taking down the Bulldogs. They are about as close to a complete team as you've got in college football this season. Kicking off at the same time as that game, the AC Championship, number 24 Houston at Cincinnati playing at Nippert. Can't see Houston's been improved. They've got a good defensive squad, which is something I can't believe I'm saying about a Dana Holgorsen coach team. But I just can't see them upsetting the Bearcats in Cincinnati and knocking down their college football playoff hopes.
Nope.
You agree with that one?
Yeah, I've got to go with Cincinnati for the home game. It's a game that they have to win, and it's a game they have to win big.
I don't know if they won that one big. Houston's not a pushover.
They've got to make a statement. They still have to make a statement. That's the bottom line for me in this.
Your nighttime kickoffs, Big Ten Championship at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, Michigan, and Iowa.
I've got to go. This game will probably end up setting the game back a good decade or so, but I've got to go with Michigan. If Michigan's serious, then they'll take care of business in this one, and it'll be a game in the low 20s. I think the further away this gets from a game in the low 20s, I think the more it fits what Michigan wants to do. I think the lower the score,
Iowa doesn't have the offense to keep up.
Yeah, so I think that the lower the score, the more Iowa has a puncher's chance. The higher the score, it's going to be Michigan's game.
And your final championship Saturday battle of the weekend next weekend, the ACC championship game, Pitt at Wake Forest. First thing I would say about this game is take the over.
Yeah.
Because this one might take a little while to play.
Yeah, so that's the biggest element in this for me is take the total and run with it, and so we'll see where it ends up. But I've got to go. Yeah, if this game ends by 11:30 Eastern time, I will be surprised. So I'll just take the total, having no earthly clue. It's 17 versus 18.
Yeah, this one I would say could be a potential toss-up game, potentially with both teams in the 40s or 50s before it's all said and done.
Yep.
Don't know who's going to end up on the higher end of that. Pretty even matchup as far as that goes, but we'll see. And I think, John, that covers all of the ground that needed to be covered for this week's episode, and it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there will be more coaching carousel news over the course of the week, and we'll try and report that either here on the podcast next week or over the course of the week on theonlinesportsguys.com, which is, of course, our website.
Yes.
Or on our social media pages, which for those of you on Facebook and Twitter are at OSG Sports. If you're watching this, of course, that means you found our YouTube channel, which would be at OSG Sports.
Mm-hmm.
Sensing a theme. Don't forget, we have a phone app. You may have heard the promo for that a little earlier in the show. Download the phone app. Now it is free. Look up at OSG Sports on the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. It's there. For those of you watching at home, John's pointing to his phone, even though you couldn't actually see it in the camera shot.
It's charging, and I don't have a long cord. So trust me, below the camera shot is the phone charging, and the app is being displayed, available for iOS and Android.
Oh, there you go. Those of you watching on the YouTube channel will not be subjected to John throwing the phone in your face. So,
no count point moment this week.
Yes. With all that being said, I think we will wrap up this show. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving and enjoyed the rivalry week football games as much as we did. For OSG Nelson, I am OSG Phil, and for Brother Wilkie on tape and Brother OSG J-Dub, who is still in technical difficulty hell, we are the Online Sports Guys. Thanks for watching our show. Thanks for listening to our show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard. And if you did like it, let us know. Like it, love it. Follow us. Do whatever you can to let us know your support. And we'll be back next week with another episode of talking about where we go from here in the college football season as we wind down to a close. Thanks again for tuning in, everybody. Have a great week. So long, everybody.
The Online Sports Guys would love to hear from you. Go to our Twitter page at OSG Sports for a comment, rant, or just whatever's on your mind about college football.